Tulis.
I like to give the good people a compliment when it is their due. And I think maybe I'm 16 years late in giving the good people in Washington, Baltimore, New York, and Chicago, where the futures are traded, the credit of a well-done operation, a successful operation in New York on 9/11 16 years ago. And I say it's a successful operation because many good things came out of it for the United States. Now, in my thinking, in defense of local economy and the free market, there is a war in effect. Of course, Washington always loves its wars, right? But there is a war in effect between the United States and America. You, my listener, are part of America, and the United States is against you. Okay, it's against you, and it's using your goodwill, it's using your ignorance, your hard work, your tax payments, your submission to its rules, your willingness, compliance to obey things that are not even in the law, for its own benefit, and to keep you in a proper attitude of submission and obeisance. To consider these questions here today in the context of local economy and the free market in Chattanooga is Sam Spade. He's an engineer and is the publisher of an economic thriller, if you will, if such is possible, and it is. If you read in the areas that I do, economic thrillers are entirely possible to write. And it's called Thieves Emporium, and it's a copy. A copy is available at Winder Binder, the private bookshop downtown on the North Shore. Sam, in what way would you say that 9/11 is a success story for government? How is it a great victory for the modern state, if that's a true assertion?
Well, regardless of the who actually was responsible for 9/11, what's clear is that it follows Rahm Emanuel's dictate of never allowing a good crisis to go to waste. The government took advantage of the crisis of 9/11 to push through the Patriot Act, to invade a number of foreign countries. I believe it had reasons to go into Afghanistan anyway and was welcoming the opportunity because sitting in Afghanistan, you effectively block the Chinese from linking up on the ground with the Iranians, and I believe that was one of the objectives of going to Afghanistan. So it was really a major success for the government because of the way they were able to take advantage of it. The deeper question in my mind, and the one that I think we need to think seriously about, is, was the government merely opportunistic, or was the government predatory in this event? Did this occur for some other reason, perhaps exactly what the government claimed happened, and the government merely took advantage of it and reacted? Or did the government, in fact, create the event? Was the government actually the perpetrator of 9/11? I think those are issues that are much more significant, because in one instance, we have a much more benign government running us than in the second. And so that's really my big concern. Now, there are three theories at the moment about what caused 9/11. One of them, of course, is the government's theory. You can believe exactly what you want about that, but it is a theory that they put forward, and many people do feel
what does it say?
That an aircraft or aircrafts were flown into the towers, that the disaster and conflagration that was caused by those collisions and aircraft full of fuel burning was enough to weaken the towers and cause them to collapse. That's the mime that the government wants us to believe. The second theory says that couldn't have happened for various reasons, and that the only solution that is possible that fits the fact is that demolition charges were placed in the tower, and they were set off to destroy the structure of the tower at a critical time, and that resulted in the tower collapse. That the fire was merely incidental, it was merely cover, it was merely an excuse to allow the government to claim that it was done by a third party and justify their actions. And there is a considerable amount of physical evidence to support that argument. And we can go into that as you would like or not later on in the show. And the third argument is that the first two analyses really do not cover all of the physical details, that events occurred on 9/11 that cannot be explained by the demolition effort, and that therefore there was a directed energy weapon of some sort that converted the structural material in the building to dust. No other way to describe it. And the result was that the building lost all its strength and it collapsed into a little pile of rubble.
And that's the Dr. Judy Wood argument made at the 2012 Energy Breakthrough Conference. And that's, I guess, the justification theory is her explanation of what you see. Again, she divides her presentation into the explanation, the proposed explanation by a directed energy weapon, but the first part is the things that are the anomalies that are not accounted for, as she argues, by the shaped charges and the nanothermite charges analysis.
Exactly. Now there are also other probably theories around about micronukes and so on and so on, and I don't know much about them. I would say that these are the three that have some interest when I look at what went on, trying to figure out what might have happened and why.
Well, just talking with Sam Spade, David Tulis here. Thanks for giving us a couple minutes of your time. Sam, what are some of the anomalies that Dr. Judy Wood, who's a university professor, what does she say? What are some of the things that she notices?
Well, if you take a look at the collapse, the demolition, if you will, of a large building, there are an awful lot of YouTube videos around. In fact, there's actually was a couple of TV shows. If you get Amazon, you can actually see a 12-hour series on demolishing large buildings. And if you take a look at any of those, you're struck by the differences between what is a common thread through those demolitions and what occurred on 9/11. And the biggest common thread is that there is dust in all of these demolitions. There's no two ways about that. But there's not nearly the amount of dust that you see with 9/11. The building that you watch when that collapses, it's almost as if the entire structure is beginning to turn to dust in front of your eyes. And in fact, you can see a number of instances in which large flakes of the structural supporting outer wall, because in the trade towers, the outer wall was actually structural steel. These they look like check flakes or something, falling through the air, trailing a large pile of dust behind them, and gradually disappearing and being gone before they ever reach the ground. And then they get caught up by the rest of the debris field and the rest of the dust. And you can see this in a number of different instances as you watch this. It's not just a single occurrence. Yes, I'm being shown something by David, a small spike of a tower that kind of dissolves into dust and disappears. I'm not sure that I find that nearly as interesting as I do the collapse of and disappearance of these large steel frames, because that optics on that is a little flaky, and it could have been that it was simply caused by a visual anomaly. But the flakes that I'm talking about is structural steel disappearing into dust. That happens repeatedly. If you watch the series of collapsing towers, you can see many instances in which a large object disappears into dust on the way to the ground. That's very startling.
You're saying that couldn't happen if it were explosives along that column that's disappearing into dust. You'd see them. You'd see explosions. But you're saying the visual data, the pictures, right, the movies show that these things are just turning into dust and they should be falling, but they just sort of are vaporized.
Well, if there were explosives, those explosives would have already done their damage. That's why this piece is torn free and falling. It's been whatever was going to rip it off has ripped it off. So there's no explosives tied to this piece at all anymore as it falls. And there's no sign of any discrete events that might be, flashes or thumps or something that might cause that piece to suddenly change or suddenly erupt or something. This is a continuous, gradual process. As it falls, the piece gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and then it disappears and is overtaken by the dust.
Another of her main theses, Sam Spade, is that the collapsed pile is very small, and if there hadn't been something that is unaccounted for and with which we're unfamiliar working, you would not have as small a pile, a dust pile, and a wreckage pile that sits at the foot of each of those towers.
That's correct. And in fact, if you watch the demolitions of commercial buildings, you'll see that all the material tends to appear and finally be deposited in a large lumpy pile, and the pile is generally speaking larger than what you observe in the kind of debris that's sitting underneath the World Trade Center. Now, one of the problems that you have here is you're not dealing with a controlled experiment. Nobody set this thing up in advance and set up a lot of measuring equipment and made sure all the variables were understood so that they could watch what's going on. You've got a lot of chaos involved, and a lot of chaos breeds different results depending on how you look at them, different ways of interpreting. And so it's often very, very gray as to exactly what could be going on. As an example, the issue of all the material. Well, there were some very deep underground structures underneath the World Trade Center, spaces. And one of the arguments is that a lot of that debris wound up falling in the space. And that is entirely possible. But I cannot see all of it going into the space. And in fact, to take a particular example, if the World Trade Center was brought down by shape charges or by a fire, in either case, you have from the floor where the fire was, the top floor of the fire, or the top floor of the explosives, depending on which argument you want to take, upwards, you have 10 or 20 or 30 stories worth of structural building that was never damaged. It was not injured. And so, depending on what happened underneath it, to suddenly remove the structure of that building, worst case, what you've got is 20 or 30 stories worth of building falling to the ground on top of this rubble pile. Now, you can say, well, when it hits the bottom, it's going to be bent out of shape. It's going to be flattened. It's going to be pancaked. It's going to look like a 20-story building that fell from 1,000 feet. That's true, but it's still going to be sitting there on top of the rubber pile. And you don't have that on either of the rubble piles. That's gone.
Well, World Trade Center 7, Sam Spade, was about 50 floors, and when it fell, it had no resistance at all. There were 40,000 tons of structural steel, and for it to fall by one method or by either explosives or some kind of directed energy weapon, you'd have to posit that all the supports failed simultaneously, because it fell straight. Yes. The roof line is almost perfectly straight all the way down. And so it's an internal combustion. Something's happening internally to it. The only outward evidence of it about to collapse were some windows falling out with some with puffs of smoke in them the seconds before its 7-second collapse to the ground. So all those supports are failing simultaneously. That implies a great deal of engineering work by some unknown party to make that happen on every floor, so that all these the key joints give way at the right time. I mean, it's a very scientific process to make that happen.
It's clear when you watch that building that this was not a gradual collapse due to damage externally inflicted on the building. If it were, the damaged area would be the weakened area. The building would gradually lean towards the weakened area, and it would have fallen across the street onto the area of the World Trade Center. It did not. It fell in its own footprint. So either it was, as the demolitions people argue, a very well set up series of explosive charges to cut the building down. And if you go online, you can see many buildings that are cut down as part of a demolition that look exactly like the World Trade Center 7, just exactly. Or, as Dr. Wood argues, it was some sort of a weapon that was fired at the entire building at once, that weakened the entire structure at once so quickly that the entire structure, again, dropped straight down onto its own footprint. Now, I don't know which it is, but I do know that there were many instances in the demolition side of the argument that Dr. Woods brings out that you cannot explain by the demolition.
Well, what's another one?
Oh, well, another one, for instance, are burnt cars. We have, if you look at the pictures of the ground around 9/11, after it occurred, you'll see a large number of vehicles that are burnt. If you go a little further and investigate it, you'll find that some of those vehicles were along the FDR Parkway. That was almost half a mile away from the building. Now, you have to ask yourself, how in the world, and it's not just one or two. I mean, this was a long line. Yeah, well, the whole, it's unclear. The pictures that you will see are the vehicles along the side of the road. But I don't believe that parking was allowed there. So I don't believe that's what happened. I think the vehicles were moved to the side of the road. I think they actually were incinerated when they were on the road itself. And somebody in the process of clearing it up. That's one of the problems, as I say, that has to do with the chaos of the situation is, people had to go on with their life rather than trying to preserve evidence. And so they shoved these burned cars off to the curb. Nonetheless, if they didn't shove them very far, they didn't have tow trucks available to move all this stuff. So these vehicles, and there are probably 200 of them lined up along the side of this road, are so far away from the World Trade Center that you can't imagine any way that demolition charges going off in the World Trade Center could have ignited these vehicles. Just none.
So
there is no way.
That suggests that gives room, you're suggesting, to Dr. Wood's thesis that there's some sort of weapon that with which we're not familiar, that maybe had a stray ray, possibly.
Exactly. It had side lobes. There's something in the antenna theory called side lobes, in which the signal doesn't just go exactly where you want, but it also spreads out in other areas and causes misses. And so that's and this is not an isolated phenomenon. These burnt cars were all over. You take a look at them inside areas closer to the World Trade Center, and you'll see paper lying around that's not burnt next to these.
We're talking with Sam Spade, an engineer and a publisher of Thieves Emporium, which is available, by the way, at Winder Binder. He's also involved in the Bitcoin Meetup group, which meets how often, Bob, and where?
Once a month, every fourth Tuesday. If you want to find out about Bitcoin because you think it's a good thing to get involved with, this is the place for beginners to start.
The reason I'm asking these questions today is that it's the 16th anniversary of 9/11, and in past years I've not really looked at it carefully enough, but I'm seeing reason to think, Sam, that 9/11 is a successful enterprise with a lot of secret parts. The people who were victims of it all have been paid a couple $1 million, and so the motivation to litigate and pursue and to make criminal cases of this event have been quashed. People have been paid off, essentially, the families of the victims. And so just leave things alone so we can receive our wealth and have our rental cabin in Tallahassee, which we hope survived the Storm Irma. But I think it's important to bring up, because what I want my listener to think of is this: if the people who arranged this event are your benefactors, are they really your benefactors? And we have so much confidence in the government. I know Congress has lost a lot of steam in public opinion, but still people believe in the state. They believe in Washington. They think that President Trump's at the top of the government, so there's a lot of goodwill. There's a lot of confidence in FEMA and confidence in government agencies. I want my listener to not have that kind of confidence, and I think that's why I believe it's a benefit here in local economy, here in the free market, Sam, to examine this, because I want the listener to have doubts. I think that's the most important thing we can do in service to you, the listener, is to have you doubt the good people, doubt their benevolence, and maybe even doubt their capacity. Though I'd say their capacity and their power is amply displayed in all that happened, and the fact that they could cover it up, the fact that these things have not come out in public. There have not been lawsuits to unearth. There have been people who have been so well paid and so well taken care of that no one has an interest to bring up the real truth. But I think history may give us something soon, Bob.
I certainly hope you're right. My concern is that we have a group that are running the company, are running the government, are controlling everything that goes on in terms of the media, the mass media, not, of course, here at the radio station that you're listening to, which is why you should be listening to it. But they are buying off all of the large broadcast media and putting out a meme that they want everybody to follow, which is that the government is here to help you. So whenever they see a hurricane come and hit the shore, whenever they see a political threat that they can amplify and aggravate, like with North Korea or with Iran, whenever they see a crisis that they can try and exploit, like, oh my God, global warming is about to kill us all. This is exactly what they want. They have the opportunity to convince you that you cannot survive in the modern world on your own. You have to be dependent on them. And that's a very scary
Well, how has 9/11 made us dependent on them, Sam?
Well, one of the big ways, of course, is their ability to watch us through the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act was passed as a direct result of 9/11. The fear of terrorism was passed as a result of 9/11. You know, your chances accepting the issue at 9/11, your chances of being killed by anything that conceivably could be called a terrorist attack are less than your chances of being killed by lightning.
Terrorism is probably one of the smallest problems our country has.
Exactly.
I think it's probably one of the smallest problems we have, and yet we've created around the fear of it a gigantic apparatus.
Yes, that is true.
And that apparatus is the enemy of local economy, it's the enemy of local free markets, it's the enemy of you, my listener, here in Chattanooga. Sam Spade, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Sam is the publisher of Thieves Emporium. You can find a copy of Winder Binder, look it up online. An economic thriller. How about that? David Tulis and Sam Spade. I'll be right back.
The Tennessee Valley's